And Lord Bilimoria, I'll start by asking for your reaction to the Prime Minister's statement over the weekend to the BBC that these adjustments are just post-Brexit adjustments. And he pushed back really on the idea that there's going to be a further loosening of visa restrictions to allow more workers in. I know you've been very vocal about the need to attract more workers to address these labour shortage constraints. What was your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments?
We're in a position now that is so challenging globally in that for us in the UK in particular, we've not only got 18 months of the pandemic, a global pandemic that we're now coming out of, but also we've had Brexit, which took almost 5 years to resolve, and we're having to adjust to it. And the Prime Minister is absolutely right that there is an adjustment required because for decades we've had access to free movement between 28 countries, and now suddenly there's a cliff edge and you don't have that free movement anymore. When it comes to lorry drivers, there are about 14,000 shortage of the 100,000 because of that. So you can't blame Brexit for everything. There is a small reason of the Brexit effect, but there's a pandemic effect and then there's a global effect. And then there are many other issues for our lorry drivers. For example, because of the pandemic, we've got 54,000 HGV licenses that are pending. If we can fast track those, that would help get more lorry drivers on the road. So the most important thing now is to adjust to the short term, because the long term we will adjust to. What we need now is the short term, and that's
so what are the priorities for you when it comes to short term fixes?
When it's a short term, that's when, with the points-based immigration system, the government very clearly said when the economy needs it, we will have a shortage occupation list. So we're saying, well, the desperate times are now where we do need not just lorry drivers, it's butchers, it's welders, it's in the hospitality industry, it's across the board that there are labour shortages. And so if we can address them from a temporary point of view, that would help the situation. But of course, the long term, you've got to reskill. At the CBI, we've estimated 9 out of 10 people will have to reskill over the next 10 years at a cost of about £130 billion. And the good news is the Chancellor has just announced a £500 million budget for reskilling.
Is it enough?
Including using job centres. Well, it's a good start. We'll have to see no more is required. I was on the National Employment Panel going back many years, and I've seen how effective it can be to get people from welfare to work. We've got 1 million people coming off furlough. That's just stopped recently. The furlough scheme was brilliant. I mean, the government's done a huge amount, £400 billion, and the furlough scheme being a big part of that, to save millions of businesses and millions of jobs. And that's why unemployment rate now is less than 5%. We think people were predicting unemployment to go up to 10%. It's 4.5%.
Do you expect that those workers who have been supported by the furlough scheme that, as you rightly said, ended at the end of last month, that those workers will come back into the workforce and ease some of these labour shortages?
Yes, there is shortage. Numbers vary, but people say there are 1 million job vacancies. Some companies have thousands of vacancies. Can there be an adjustment? Can there be quick reskilling? I think it's possible, and I think we should be able to, but we still will have that shortage. And that's where we need to be very, very careful, because this recovery, the IMF chief economist, going back to May, I remember I was chairing the B7 before the G7, and Geeta Gopinath said, your country, you've got a fantastic vaccination program, £400 billion to support. Countries like yours should have a V-shaped bounce-back recovery. That's what we all thought in May. Now look at the recovery, it's very fragile because of all the issues you've just mentioned, the energy crisis, the labour shortages, inflation. So we've got to be very careful in this fragile environment. Government and business have got to more than ever work collaboratively together. That's what got us through this pandemic, is working together, whether it's a job retention scheme, whether it's VAT going down to 5%, whether it's mass testing that's now freely available. All that was government and business working together.
The energy crisis is clearly not unique to the UK. But tell me, what is the pressure that's being exacted, the toll that is being exacted on your members by these record high energy prices?
The energy prices is a global issue. They've gone up sixfold since January. Now, that's not under our control. There are certain things under our control, but that is not. And the effect has been huge. The disruption caused by the fuel shortages has been enormous. I mean, in my own business, we haven't been able to get deliveries through. It's affected everybody. And of course, what people are worried about is food shortages, and we've got to try and avoid that as much as possible. The hospitality industry, again, government's doing just the right thing. They've formed a task force with government and business working together to try and address this. We at the CBI have said we should have a Cobra-style government and business task force right now so that we can work together day by day to deal with these really challenging issues.
Are your members able to absorb the cost? Inflation running at a 9-year high. You have the likes of Blue Bay Asset Management saying that they forecast possibly inflation as high as 6% next year. Are companies able to absorb the costs and the impact on margins, or they're going to have to pass that on? What are you seeing amongst your members?
It's very difficult. In certain cases, freight has gone up 10 times. Now, to absorb freight rates going up 10 times is very difficult. Inflation is predicted by the Bank of England, by the government, to go up to 4.5%. But the prediction is that this is all about adjusting to coming out of a pandemic, and it should go back down to 2% by the middle of next year. The big worry would be is if inflation persists. Nobody wants that. And the worst thing you would want is stagflation, where you have inflation and no growth. And then you have the prospect rate of interest rates going up. So we've got to try and, again, work together to make sure. Most important thing government's got to do is encourage investment. We have this thing in the UK called the super deduction that the Chancellor announced at the last budget, where you get 130% by investing. That's what we've got to do, because what we've got to do is create growth, which creates the jobs, which will then pay the taxes, which will pay down the debt. The worst thing to do is to put up taxes. What we need to do is investment, lower taxes, growth, employment.
OK, well, you've made the point there about taxes. We've, of course, had this increase that's going to kick in from April next year to pay for the NHS and social care. There is a debate going on as to whether or not the party, the Conservative Party, the government, should raise taxes further as they look to level up that mantra, particularly in the north of England. There is, some would argue, a need to do that, given the spending that was triggered to reduce some of the impacts of the pandemic.
We've had a situation over the last 18 months that has been a global crisis. The last time we had a crisis of that magnitude is probably the Second World War. And at the end of the Second World War, debt to GDP went up to 250%. We're at about 100%. And it took from 1945 until about 1962 to come down from 250% to 100%. We've got nowhere near 250% at the moment. We've gone up to about 100%. These are desperate times that have needed desperate measures. What we've got to do is make sure we don't stifle the recovery. We've got to support this recovery. Businesses have suffered so much. We need all the help that we can get. And government has been brilliant. We need that help to continue. Make sure we come out of this with growth, with employment, with jobs.
Are you confident they won't raise taxes further from here?
Well, we've always said this is the wrong time to raise taxes. The tax rises have been announced. And we hope that there will be no more tax rises. We want growth and investment.